Everybody. Hello, my name is Rhonda Thompson. I'm the chief of the Bureau of Air Quality at South Carolina Department of Health, Environmental Control, or DHEC. First, I want to thank everyone for your attendance today, either in person or virtually. Before we start, just a few logistics. We have a sign-in sheet. As you came into the room, please be sure to check your name. If your name is not on the list, please add that and your email address so we can include in the future correspondence. We also have some printed agendas available for you. Some other logistics, restrooms. As you enter the rear of this auditorium, for some reason the men's rooms is easier to find. I don't know why that is, but it's slightly to the left. The ladies' room, you gotta go to the right, go all the way around, past the elevator to the stairwell to find the ladies' room. If you could turn your cell phones to silent, we greatly appreciate that. All the slides that you will see today will be made available to everyone that registered for the meeting. So please be sure we have your email address. This meeting is being recorded. Yep, it is being recorded. We did have some people ask for a link for the recording. It is being recorded today. Back in August, we had a kickoff meeting after the EPA's PM rule was proposed. We said back then we would pull the group back together after the rule went final. The rule has gone final now. So we are back here to share information about some of the changes that were made from the proposal, and to also share some information from both the South Carolina Environmental Agency and also the Georgia Environmental Agency about implementation of that rule. Before we start with the agenda, I just wanted to make a note for those that may not be aware of our agency restructuring. We are currently the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control, but effective July 1st, 2024, just in a few months, we will become two separate agencies, the Department of Environmental Services and the Department of Public Health. Thank you. So all of us will be a part of the Department of Environmental Services, so we'll be known as DES instead of DHEC. So you may start seeing emails from us with a different agency name. So wanted to share that with you. So first on the agenda, we want to do some introductions. We did that last time and thought that was very helpful. We're going to ask that everyone just give their name, and if they're representing an organization or company, tell us who that is. So we'll make this very short. We will start with those in the room first, and we'll pass around a microphone so everyone in the virtual audience can hear it. And then we will turn to the people joining us virtually, and you'll get some instructions of when to unmute yourself and to give your name in your organization.
Morning, I'm Heinz Skies, one of the division directors with the Bureau of Air Quality.
Good morning, my name is Greg Keena. I'm the Air Modeling Section Manager.
David Scott, representing Kimberly Clark.
Don Barbers, Columbia County Engineer.
Chris Hobson, U.S. Forest Service, Staten River.
Kyle Smith, South Carolina Forest Commission.
Mike Gray was Science Code, he used to be solid waste special accomplish.
Justin White, also with Sonic Scope.
Howard Paradise City, North Augusta.
Will Williams, Western South Carolina Economic Development Partnership.
Scott Sterling, Columbia County Planning Services.
LJ Peterson with the Arts NPO.
We got you.
Okay, great. We'll get back started here. Sorry about that. We have the computer to go dead on us. So I'll turn it back over to you, Rhonda, and make sure we're.
We've introduced everyone in the room, so we want to introduce everyone that's on virtually. So can y'all manage that on your end for us, Catherine? How many?
Yeah,
people have, how many people do we have online?
I don't, go ahead, Catherine, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we've got about 27 folks online. Amy, you're gonna go down the list?
I am gonna go down the list. So I have a phone number here and I'm not sure who the person is, but it's 1-804-972. Are the first digits. Can that person please introduce themselves?
This is Michelle McDaniel with BHE Energy.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Hold on, let me write that, Michelle Daniel. Thank you. Rocky.
Yeah, Rocky Beery, Francis Marion, and Sumter National.
Scott Dickelman.
Some of them may not have microphones.
Okay, Scott may not. So Mary Payton, do you just want to introduce who Scott is? He works in her section.
Do I need a microphone or just? My air regulation staff is on, and Scott Littleman, Marie Brown, Holly Randolph, Joel Hodges, Renee Madden, and Sophie Grimsley.
Okay, good. Thank you. So Marie, she just mentioned everybody's name that works in her section. If you would just let everybody know what you do in the section, please. Your time. You might not have a microphone either. Okay. Yeah. Let's go down next. Let's go to Calvin. Calvin Bailey. Maybe there's a couple of people that don't have a microphone. Christopher Hall. Allen. Okay, some people are introducing themselves through the chat too. That's great. Eugene White.
Good morning. I'm Eugene White, and I'm with the Aiken County branch of the NAACP.
Thank you. Donna Gilbert. Rick Gillum.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. This is Rick Gillum with the EPA in Atlanta. I'm the air modeling team leader and work on exceptional events.
Hamid.
Good morning, Hamid Malik. I'm with the Augusta, City of Augusta, Engineering and Environmental Services Director.
Okay, thank you. Joel Duke.
Good morning, Joel Duke with Aiken County Government.
Justin.
Justin Fickus with Trinity Consultants.
Mark McKenna. Melina.
Good morning, Milena Borisova with All4 Consultants.
Nick.
Good morning, Nick Janopoulos with Northwind Portage Air Quality Services out of Greenville, South Carolina.
Oscar.
Oscar Flight, City of Augusta.
Rachel. Rachel Martin. Okay, she must have a mic. So Holly is in Mary Payton's section.
Yes, I have them. I'm in the regulation development and SIP management side of things for Bureau of Air Quality.
Okay, thank you. Alan?
Yeah, I'm Alan Risa. I'm with DHEC. I'm actually in the Aiken Regional Office, and I'm the Air and Land Team Lead.
Michael Shrout. Michael, can you unmute and introduce yourself? Or you need to put in the chat. Okay. Next is Tanya.
Tanya Bonatatabas, Savannah Riverkeeper.
Udu Mekong.
Udu Mekong Udoko with the Arts NPO.
Robert.
Good morning, Robert Vandermeracker with TRC.
Megan White. Megan, can you, okay, no mic. All right, thank you. You could just introduce yourself in the chat. That'd be great. And then the last one is Wallace White.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Wallace White. I'm with AARP Georgia. I'm the Associate State Director of Advocacy and Rural Outreach.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourself. We will go back to the presentations.
So, and if you can just let us know when to progress, we'll progress to scribe.
I can use this one.
You want to use that one?
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna get my slides up. Oh, they're there.
Yeah.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Jim Boylan, Chief of the Air Protection Branch at Georgia EPD. And I'm gonna speak twice today, but my initial talk right here is just gonna talk about the overview of the PM NACs. Next slide. So particulate matter are very small particles in the air. They can be emitted directly into the atmosphere, or they can be formed in the atmosphere through secondary reactions such as SO2 and NOx being converted into sulfate and nitrate, which are particle forms. So there's that, and then they also have health impacts. They have health impacts, cardiovascular impacts, as well as respiratory impacts. And that's why we're concerned about particulate matter. Next slide. So particulate matter PM 2.5 are particles that are less than 2.5 microns in diameter, which is much smaller than the size of a piece of hair. So EPA came up with an approach for controlling criteria air pollutants. PM is a criteria air pollutant. So the first is the setting of the National Ambient Air Quality Standard, which I'll talk a little bit about. Then the next is the designation process, which Mary Payton's going to talk about that when we get to that. And then for non-attainment areas, there's a development of SIPs, and Mary Payton's going to talk about that. And then non-attainment areas are then redesignated back to attainment and then go through redesignation and maintenance. So that's kind of a big picture. We're really going to mostly focus on really steps 1 and mostly steps 2, because designations is a big deal, and that's kind of the first big thing coming down the line. Next slide. So the NACs are set by EPA. There's the primary standards that are health-based, and then the secondary standards that are welfare-based, things like visibility, climate, impacts on ecological systems, and things like that are all secondary. But the primary standards are typically more stringent than the secondary standards. So the primary standards are the ones that we focus on. All NACs have 4 elements. They have the indicator, which is basically the pollutant being measured, the averaging period, the form of the standard, and the level. Next slide. So for PM, let's see. Okay, so this is the final NACs that just came out. So for the PM NACs, the the annual PM 2.5 standard used to be 12 micrograms per cubic meters, and that was lowered to 9 micrograms per cubic meter. EPA retained the daily standard at 35 micrograms per cubic meter. And then the secondary standards as well as the PM standards were all retained as well. So the only thing that changed as far as the standards was the annual PM 2.5 standard going from 12 micrograms down to 9 micrograms per cubic meter. And the effective date of this is May 6th of 2024. So it's right around the corner when this all becomes effective. Next slide. So this is the final PM NACs. I talked about the 4 elements. So for the annual standard, it's a 1-year average. The form of the standard is annual average, averaged over 3 years. And so it takes 3 years worth of data to get a design value. And then, of course, the level is now 9 micrograms, whereas it used to be 12. And then we have basically the daily standard as well, but we're not going to really talk about that today because there's really no areas that are likely to go over the daily standard at this point in time. It's really the annual standard that's driving everything that we're going to be talking about going forward. Next slide. So there are some new monitoring requirements. They have come up with an environmental justice factor. And so if an area is required to add a new monitor, it would have to be placed in an at-risk community. We don't think that this is going to affect anything here in the Augusta-Aiken area. In fact, in Georgia, I know it's, and probably South Carolina, it's not going to affect any of the monitors in either of our states. Next slide. The other thing that changed with the new lower standard is the air quality index, or the AQI. And it's basically based off what the annual standard is, and the daily standard basically sets the window for code yellow. So the code yellow now starts at 9 micrograms, whereas it used to start at 12. It still ends at 35 micrograms. And then, so what we're going to end up having are less code greens and more code yellows, even though the actual air quality hasn't changed. We will have more code yellow alerts. The code orange range is identical before the change and after. So the number of code oranges should stay the same, but all the other codes have basically lowered the level. So the code, there'll be more code reds and higher up. But the main thing to take away is that there will be more code yellows just because the range of values has changed, where it now goes from 9 to 35 micrograms. Next slide. So I just have a couple more slides to just really set the stage for today. We're going to be talking about designations, monitoring data, exceptional events, a whole bunch of stuff. But really, the whole objective here is to avoid Augusta and Aiken areas being designated as non-attainment areas. And the reason is because it does have a significant impact on permitting. For areas that are designated non-attainment, they're going to require RAC and RACM, which is reasonably achieve available control measures and technologies, and that's for existing sources. Any new source is going to have to put on layer, which is lowest achievable emission rates, and emission offsets are going to be required, which means in order to increase emissions of one of these 5 pollutants, you're going to have to reduce emissions by not only an equal amount, but typically more than an equal amount to more than offset the emission increases and decreases. Basically, it really does stagnate new businesses coming into the area, as well as businesses expanding. Even in the attainment areas, even if the area is designated attainment, it can lead to issues. One, because the new standard starts next month, and It basically makes any type of large projects that do PSD modeling, or I know in South Carolina, they model even for smaller projects. They have to pass this new 9 micrograms per cubic meter standard, and at the end of the presentation, Greg will be talking about modeling. So it really makes it more difficult, even in a attainment area, for new businesses to come in and for existing businesses to expand, which can lead to impacts on economic development. Next slide. One of the other issues with non-attainment areas are conformity requirements. So there is transportation conformity, which means that any projects that use federal highway money needs to do a demonstration that the project will not lead to a violation of the NACs. So it's a bunch of extra work that has to be done every time a new project comes in. That's transportation conformity. And then there's general conformity, which also involves federal money being used for other projects such as low income housing, as well as airports, or at least in Georgia, those are the two that we mostly deal with for general conformity. And the deal with this is that it's not only while the area is non-attainment, but it's also why it's maintenance. So once you're on non-attainment, then you become attainment, and then you have to continue these transportation and general conformity measures for an additional 20 years after you come back into attainment. So the point is, there's a lot of extra things that need to be done for non-attainment areas. And so we're going to try the best that we can to have as few areas designated as non-attainment, including Aiken and Augusta. And a lot of the presentations today will really be talking about how we're going to attempt to do that. And I think that's my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you.
Introduce the next speaker. You can introduce the next speaker.
That be fine. Yes, if you want to.
Okay, so our next speaker is going to be Deanna Ozer, who is the Assistant Branch Chief at Georgia EPD. She also used to run our ambient monitoring program for many, many years. And with that, Deanna.
Thanks, Jim. Oh, wait, hold on. Get settled. Awesome. Thanks. Can you go to the next one?
Okay, next slide.
Oh, next slide, sorry. So Georgia EPD started putting out continuous monitors in 2017. We have one of the largest networks of the Teledyne T640s and T640Xs in the Southeast. We were early adopters, which allowed us to learn a lot of lessons. And then when EPA got a lot of grant money, they said, hey, why don't you put out T640s everywhere? So now we have a lot of sites that are running T640s and the filter-based method. The filter-based method is what we call the filter federal reference method. And that takes a sample over a 24-hour period, collects it on a filter. We have to have an operator physically go out and collect the sample. We have to send it to our lab. And for Georgia, our lab is in Wyoming. So that's not exactly down the road. We send it to Wyoming to be analyzed. We have to wait to get the sample results back and then go through our quality assurance process. It is not a quick process. So I do see the benefits of the T640s. They're good instruments. The only problem was we knew they read a little bit higher, and as the standard was going a little bit lower, we were in a tight spot. So you can go to the next slide. So looking at 2021 through 2023 data. So the agencies are in the process of certifying our 2023 data now. It takes a couple of months for the QA process. The designations, Mary Payton will talk about in a minute, will be done with 2022 to 2024. So we're going to look at kind of a little bit ahead of schedule. You can see Georgia does not look good. For a lot of these sites, we do have these T640 data included. Now for 2022 through 2024 data, we were able to get an exclusion for a lot of our sites so that the higher bias data of the continuous instruments was not going to be comparable to the NACs. But we still had a lot of instruments out there that was the only one at the site. So we didn't have any other choice. We had a lot of sites that we just had to deal with it. So when we wrote our, so we knew that there was a high bias and we wanted to give EPA some options. So if you go to the next slide. When we did our next comment letter, when the proposal came out, we pointed out the high bias of these instruments. Now, this is a tool that EPA has on their website where you can take these continuous monitors, which are FEMs, federal equivalency monitors, and compare their performance to those filter-based monitors. Well, if it was an ideal world, you would see everything line up perfectly. On the upper left, it would all be on the solid line, meaning it's a one-to-one correlation, life is good. You can see on the upper right-hand box that we have a lot of high bias data, especially in the winter and the fall. We're going to see that a little later when we ran some of our own comparisons. This is prescribed fire season. And for those of you that live in this area, Fort Eisenhower does do a lot of prescribed fires. It's not the only one in the state, but it is a big impact on our monitor. You can see that polygon in the bottom left corner. In a wonderful world, all seasons would be inside the polygon. We'd be fantastic. We're not. And you can also tell the bottom right corner, you can see we're right at about 20% bias. You can keep going. So we have all this data. We decided we'd suggest the EPA what to do. Hopefully they'll take us at our word, but anyway, we thought we'd come up with some solutions for them to help them out. So we came up with 3 approaches for the high bias that was in the Teledyne data. We looked at an annual factor, and what we did there is we took, and I'm going to go through each of these a little bit more in detail, but we took all the data for each year where we had a FEM and an FRM side by side on those days, and we compared them. How did they do? I'm sorry, I talk with my hands and that doesn't work with this microphone. Then we also looked at quarterly. Is there a quarterly or seasonal bias? And then finally, we know the T640s do have an impact from smoke. Again, prescribed fire does have a lot of smoke. So we wanted to look and see at the higher levels, higher concentrations, what impact could we make a difference there? So you can go to the next slide. So I'm going to start off talking about the annual bias. We started deploying these in 2017, but by 2018, we had enough to make a good comparison. So we took data from 2018 to 2022, and we take each day that we had a sampler running the filter-based and the FEM side by side, and we summed up all the 2018, 2019, and so on. For the sites that did not have this comparison, because we were deploying these off and on throughout this time period, we calculated a statewide factor. So we were able to do that for each of our sites in the network. Next. I've got some pretty graphs I think I look better in a minute. So we also did this quarterly. And in the quarterly, you can see, again, we took first quarter. You could also do this seasonally with winter, summer, fall, but we decided to go with the calendar quarter and look at each quarter separately. Next slide. And finally, we looked at the high and low. At about 20 micrograms per meter cubed, you can see a pretty good divergence of what the FRM and FEM are looking at. Again, we think it's due to the smoke impacts. And so we actually just across the board, if the measurements were above 20, we added a factor or calculated a factor. And we did this again, if they were side by side, we used a site specific factor. And if we didn't have side by side data for those days or the site for the year, we would use a statewide factor. Next. So here's where we ended up. You can see we did this for every monitor where we had T640 in the network. And I think it was Gainesville. I'm on cheat sheet here. Gainesville and Athens didn't have a filter-based method. So that's why they don't have a comparison. The others, Sandersville and Savannah, they only had the T640 for part of the time. So we use the statewide method there. But you can see from this, there's not a huge difference. Regardless of which path we chose, we were going to be about 20%. Now you can tell like in the Q1 and Q4 in the seasonal, their numbers are lower, which means it was a greater change when we applied this factor. So it was a bigger impact on the data. So going forward, we'll just use the annual data bias adjustment factor for our discussions, but we did calculate this for all of them. You can go next. So after we calculate these bias adjustment factors, we went back and we for every day. Now remember, the T640s, you get data for every hour, but the filter-based, you only get a number at the end of the day because it's midnight to midnight. So we took the annual the daily 24-hour average for each of the FEM measurements and applied this bias adjustment factor and then compared it. We did this for every instrument every day. Thank goodness for Power BI, because that's what we did. But anyway, we were able to do this, and you could also do this for the hourly data. Because the agencies have to submit hourly data into AQS, which is the EPA's air quality system. But for the purposes of this demonstration, we chose to do it with the daily values. You can go next slide. So here we go. Here's the meat and potatoes. This is the Augusta site where we monitor. We have a T640. We had a T640X at one time, which measures multiple fractions of PM. The T640 just does PM 2.5. We've also had a filter-based monitor there. What you can see here is the pink dots are the filter-based method. That's the federal reference method. That's the one that the standard was based on. The blue line is our unadjusted T640 data. It's pretty high. But regardless of which of the bias adjustment methods we chose, it brought them all within the range of the filter-based method. So we did this across the board for all of our sites from 2018 through I think we've done it now through 2023. Okay, we can go next. So this is just a reminder of what that graph looked at. This is the design values using the 2021 to 2023 data for each of the metropolitan statistical areas. Augusta area, which is Augusta and North Augusta, is 10.4 according to our raw data in AQS. If you go to the next slide. This is what it looks like after we apply the bias adjustment factor. Now, I know some of it's still higher, but 9.4 is a lot better to deal with than a 10.1. And you can see the green area down in Waycross, Georgia. It didn't change. It was 7.3. Can you go back one slide again and then come back just so we can see it again? Yep, and then go back. Thank you. So you can see the green area down in Waycross didn't change because there was only a filter-based method there. Atlanta has filter-based methods, so it didn't change either. That's our driving instrument there is a filter-based method. But for everywhere we had the T640, we were able to bring down the design values quite a bit. So if you go to the next slide. So here are the monitors that represent the Augusta-Aiken area. Because we have we share the airspace, Georgia and South Carolina have a memorandum of understanding so that we agree that we're going to share the responsibilities. However, the highest monitor is the one that EPA uses to make the designations. You can see our Augusta monitor is down in the middle of industrial area. I don't have a pointer, but Fort Eisenhower is down towards bottom left, where the big green area, that's where a lot of prescribed fires are. The wind blows the way to that monitor. The Trenton monitor up in South Carolina is not quite in this industrial area, and it does measure a little bit lower. So if you go to the next slide. So this is a frequency distribution. This is all the measurements we had that came up with our design value. Interestingly enough, 2021 and 2023 data had the same annual average, which is weird because you can tell we had a lot higher values in 2021. For 2022, we have a smaller data set because we were running that filter-based method without the continuous monitor being a regulatory monitor. And that meant it was only 1 in 3 for part of that year. Towards the end of the year, we started running it every day. So if you go one more slide, please. Thank you. So this, at the end of the day, this is where our numbers lie. We have our, what's in AQS right now, the EPA is looking at as 10.1, but these bias adjustment factors for the 3-year design value is 9.4. Now, we know EPA has been working with the vendor to correct this bias problem. This summer, they actually pushed out a firmware update for all of the T640s across the nation. In Georgia, we implemented it August 1st, 2023. That data, we're comparing it to our filter-based data to see how close it is to our bias adjustment factors. All the state agencies have been asked to put in our temperature data back to 2017 if we had instruments that far back. And EPA is in the process of releasing adjusted hourly data. Remember I told you you could actually do those bias adjustment factors for every hour. So EPA is in the process of doing that. Hopefully soon next month we'll be able to see it. And then we can run a comparison of how Teledyne's factor compares to the factor we came up with our site-specific data in Georgia. But it is a proprietary correction, so they won't let us see the equation. So we're gonna have to figure it out. But stay tuned. This is an evolving process. And Jim's gonna come back and talk to us in a few minutes about how we're gonna, our approach to bring that 9.4 we have in Augusta right now down to the standard dealing with those prescribed fibers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do I need to do swearing?
Good morning. I am Connie Turner. I am with the state of South Carolina, and I am over the air monitoring network. I'm division director. We have about 24 people that operate the network in the state. Much like what Deanna said, we have been doing a lot of work, and Jim, that we're trying to do all these comparisons. If y'all
Can we
go
bring
to
up
the-
Connie's
Yes.
slides, please?
It's loading
Must be the
Thank
blue
you.
circle.
slowly.
I think one of the things we hope that you take away today is all of the work that's going on behind the scenes to try to get to what is PM 2.5 in the Augusta area. We're trying to determine the bias. EPA is working on it. We're working on it. Much like Georgia has done, we're comparing our FRM data. That's the filter base that Deanna spoke about. We call that the gold standard. That is what EPA set the DAX on. And it is a filter that we take into the laboratory and we can actually weigh it. I can tell you, we can pull the filter out, we can see the particulate on it. It's something we get our hands on. The T640 or other federal equivalent methods, they have to go through testing to demonstrate they give equivalent data to the samplers. But as Deanna mentioned, we know that the T640s have that high bias. We've also seen about a 20% bias in our data. We are also doing site-by-site comparison. We rolled out our T640s also a couple of years ago when they first came out. We wanted to see, is it comparable? As the manager of all of our data, we look at it as we do not want to roll this data out until we're confident that it's giving us equivalent data to our samplers. So we have been evaluating that. And we're looking at that. We rolled out the alignment tool, which was what the vendor Teledyne sent out to us to try to bring it more in line with the FEM, with the FRM. And so we'll see what happens.
I'm working on it. Sorry.
It's okay. I don't mind ad-libbing. So,
All right, here we go.
Okay. So anyway, when they rolled that out, we are going through the process of evaluating what was the original bias, what is the bias now that they've corrected it, and we are looking forward to the temperature corrected data. We have uploaded all of that information, so EPA has it, so they can do that adjustment, and we will also have the 3 columns, unadjusted, adjusted, and then the other adjusted for the 3rd column, so that we can compare and see. Because at the end of the day, we want to know what the FRM data would be, so that we know we're actually comparing against the NAAQS the way that EPA intended it to be. All right, next slide, please. As Deanna mentioned, we do have the 2 monitors in the CSRA that we do work together on those. And Trenton is in a more rural area than the the Augusta monitor. Next slide, please. And looking at our values, the 24-hour standard, as Jim mentioned, is 35, and we're averaging about 19 based on the 2023 data. We haven't certified this data yet. The data is quality and has been uploaded to EPA, but it has not been certified yet with the EPA. We can talk a minute about that. The annual design value is 8.3, so you can see we're under the 9 for that particular monitor. So we're very pleased with that. And that right now includes all of the data. We are working with EPA to exclude the higher bias data and evaluate what impact that will have on the design value calculation. So we're eagerly awaiting that. Next slide, please. This shows a trend of the design values over the past several years. You can see it went down and it's going back up just a little bit. So we're keeping an eye on that. This is for the MSA and the highest monitor in the MSA. So it's not a particular monitor like Trenton, but it's whatever's highest in that MSA. Next slide, please. We like to look at the Trenton annual concentrations in South Carolina, so we have an idea of what's going on. If we see indications of it going up or down, we like to look around and see what may have changed in that area or might be influencing our data. So we do evaluate that again to make sure that whatever we're reporting is indicative of the actual PM 2.5 in the area. And you can see it went up a little bit. Deanna and I think Jim may have spoken to about the smoke impacting these monitors. They do have a significant impact on the T640s. We're still looking to see what that percentage is. And I'm very curious to see what it is after the alignment tool. We're still seeing a little bit, but I can't speak to the significance of that at this point because I don't have enough data, but we're still evaluating what impact that has because we do see in the fall and winter that we have higher data points and we're trying to evaluate what might be contributing to that. Once we figure that out, then we can decide, how to discuss that and come to any kind of conclusions and solutions if there are solutions to be made at that time with EPA and with both Georgia and South Carolina. Next slide, please. I did want to note for PM 2.5 in South Carolina, we have had no exceedances of the PM 2.5 for 2021, 22, or 23 for our Trenton monitor. So we are pleased with that monitor as far as the overall MSA. At least we know, where we need to focus our efforts for the MSA and attainment issues. Next slide, please. All right, and we'll have questions at the end, as Ron mentioned. But again, we are working through this issue. We do see the impacts of smoke and other activities that we'll have on our monitors. We will come out and have all of the data as well with those correction factors and present those to EPA to see what we can do that will help bring some of those numbers down as well, even in the Trenton side. Thank you. Thanks.
Right. All right, so for the fun stuff, paperwork. My section for South Carolina will be responsible for putting together the state implementation plan, demonstrating how we will comply with the NACs. And this will be done statewide, but I'll try and focus on a little bit some of the areas where we are. So go ahead and go to the next slide, please. All right, so designation. So what is the first step? And we're in this spot right now. So it was signed on February 6th, back 2024. So we have until February 2025 to submit our designation. So that's basically the state goes and tells the EPA, this is where we feel like the state should be versus attainment and non-attainment. And this is all going to be based, we've been saying this will be based on our data from 2021, 2022, and 2023. The next step is the EPA has 1 year after that to either agree with us or they will tell us that they do not agree. Their designation, which is going to be the final designation that we will have to write our SIP based on, will be based on 2022, 2023, and 2024 data. So I'll mention that again in a minute. So what this means is we're going to be classified either attainment, non-attainment, or unclassifiable / attainment. So basically, it means if you don't have a monitoring area, you can't determine exactly what your attainment status is. So EPA likes to use this term unclassifiable. So, next slide. All right, so these final designations, these are directly from EPA. We do not have any part of this, and that is going to be, as I noted, that 2022, 23, and 24 data, note that 2021 gets dropped off. So this will be pretty critical as we're going through. It's not just important what's happening right now in our data, but what's happening this year, because that will be important as we go through this designation process. Connie discussed that the 2023 data is actually being certified right now. I think Georgia might be a step ahead of us. We're still working on getting ours done, but we do have until May 1st to do that. So we're on schedule. Nothing is running behind. And as of right now, for all of South Carolina, based on the data for 2021 and 22, none of our monitors have a design value above 9.0. So the entire state right now is looking pretty good. Sorry, Georgia. All right, next slide, please. All right, so the SIP, this is the big thing. This is the state implementation plan. This is what we use to tell EPA we are complying with all the NACs, not just PM, but this is for all of them. And so the first thing that we would do would be called an infrastructure SIP. Do we have enough stuff in place in South Carolina to support being in compliance with the new standard? So basically this, and also would include the transport. Y'all might have been hearing some stuff circulating around the Good Neighbor SIP. This is South Carolina, Georgia, not really part of this, but y'all might have been hearing about this for ozone and what's going on with transport for ozone right now. So, all right, next slide. All right, this is a lot of stuff. This is what has to be included. So when you talk about the amount of work that we're going to be doing to put what goes into the SIP that we submit to EPA, it's a lot of stuff that are very confusing words. So I'm just kind of, as an idea, we'll have to do a baseline emissions inventory. We have to do a future projected emissions inventory, control strategies. Control strategies can be PM reduction programs, rack back, which Jim mentioned. That's the reasonably available or best available control technologies. We had to put together reasonable further progress, motor vehicle emissions budget. Those are assigned to us. That includes your transportation conformity, which is just ensuring that federal transportation actions will not hinder the area from attaining or maintaining. There's quantitative milestones that we have to meet, contingency measures, and then the fun one, which those of you representing industries, that would be the non-attainment NSR plan if any of the areas are deemed non-attainment. So that permitting aspect is going to be a good one. All right, next slide. And this is just the next two are tables that were put together for us to help share exactly where the milestones are. So we are on the first line where it says plus 1 year. So when it gets signed, we have plus 1 year to do our designations. At the plus 2 year mark, EPA has their designations. And then at the plus 3 mark, that's when we have to submit our infrastructure SIP. So basically we only have 2 years to write the SIP once EPA has confirmed what the designation will be. So I can't start on it now because I don't know where we're going to actually officially end up. So I'm just making sure, I want to mention the second line right there. This is the plus 1 year, 8 months. That is October 10th, 2025. That is what's called a 120-day letter. It's a very, great term because 120 days after we turn in ours, the EPA has to tell us whether or not they're going to deny it. So if they are going to deny us, they will tell us so that we can be prepared for our designation to not be what we anticipate it to be. All right, and then the last slide is just kind of this is if you're in a non-attainment, and we anticipate if an area is a non-attainment around here, it will be moderate, not severe. So this just kind of changes a little bit. So instead of doing your infrastructure SIP at the plus 2 years, then you have to take into account the non-attainment area. It's that's going to be a slightly different timeline. And then you have the end of the 6th calendar year, so that's in 2032. That is the attainment date. So that is, if you are moderate, you have to be in attainment by that date. And that also starts the triggers for those maintenance plans, which I think Jim said he was going to cover. Maintenance areas. All right, and that's it for me.
You want to announce who's next?
I don't know. Oh, Jim, do that.
All right, so I'm going to talk about exceptional events. One thing to mention that Mary Payton talked about the attainment SIP with all that stuff, the contingency measures, non-attainment NSR. That's only if the area is designated non-attainment, and we're hoping to use exceptional events to get the area designated attainment, in which case Mary Payton wouldn't have to write the attainment SIP. And, so that's what the hope is here. So next slide. So like Deanna said, you know, after we adjust for the biased adjustment, Augusta area is still at 9.4. The only tool left in our toolbox to get us from 9.4 to 9.0 is exceptional events. So what we're doing here, or what we've done in Georgia is, you know, the first step is doing the bias adjustment. That's the first step. Before you do that step, you really can't do any of the other steps. And we've come up with our own bias adjustment approach. We don't know if EPA will accept that or not. EPA is coming out with their own approach, but it won't be out for another month or two. And the clock's already ticking on us, you know, doing these designation recommendations and identifying exceptional events. So the idea is to remove the high event days. We're going to really focus on 22 and 2023 because, like Deanna and Connie had said, 2021 is going to drop off by the time EPA does the final designations. So we don't want to put any effort, you know, doing exceptional events for 2021, and EPA is not going to even include 2021. So we're going to focus on 2022 and 2023, and we're basically going to identify enough days to remove to get our design value from 9.4 down to 9.0 in Augusta. There's 5 elements we have to follow, I'll talk about, and then we submit our demonstration to the EPA, and then hopefully they approve them. Next slide. So what are exceptional events? So when EPA concurs with an exceptional event, that day's worth of data is actually removed from the annual average for the comparison to the annual NACs. So as we identify these days, they get removed. We've looked at the data in Georgia. You know, basically any value above 15 micrograms per cubic meter, we've looked at a bunch of data, we feel would actually be eligible for an exceptional event demonstration. Most of them are wildfires and prescribed fires. 4th of July fireworks are eligible, and then dust events such as Saharan dust events. And we've identified a number of those using speciated data. But really the biggest majority is going to be prescribed fires, and that's the ones that I'm going to talk about next. And we are working on, so as far as prescribed fire exceptional events, there's only been one submitted and approved in the entire country. EPA worked closely with the West. They picked an example of a federal land manager burn, a single burn that actually led to a high value, and they put together a demonstration for that. And it was 80 pages or 100 pages long. It was very detailed demonstration. It was very straightforward because it was a single burn leading to an impact on a monitor. That's the only prescribed fire exceptional event demonstration that's been submitted and officially approved by EPA. So only one in the country. We are working with our Georgia Forestry Commission, with EPA Region 4, as well as our sister states to come up with a template for the Southeast, because what happens in the Southeast for prescribed burning is vastly different than what happens out in the West. It's not a single fire typically that leads to a high event. It's multiple small fires, and these small fires are being lit up by a lot of private landowners who may not have a burn plan and things like that. So what's happening here in the Southeast is very different than what's happening in the West. That's why we're working on this template to try to come up with a good template for everybody in the Southeast to use. Next slide. So this just shows, you know, a lot of burning in the Southeast. In fact, Georgia is the ranked 3rd in the country for the amount of prescribed burning, behind Kansas and Florida. Next slide. So this is the slide that Deanna showed earlier. We have 6 areas after the FEM bias adjustment correction. We still have 6 areas that are above the standard. We have Augusta, Columbus, Sandersville, Macon, Atlanta, and the Chattanooga area. So we have 6 areas that we need to basically identify exceptional events to bring those design values down to 9.0. Next slide. So this is an estimate of how many exceptional events demonstrations we will have to do for each of those 6 areas in order to bring them down to 9.0. So for the Augusta area, it's 23 events that need to be documented and submitted to EPA. across the state, we're estimating 124 exceptional events. These all need to be submitted to EPA by February of next year. And so it's a ton of work, you know, and if each of these were 50 to 100 pages long per event, I mean, that is a ton of work. In fact, I've got multiple people on my staff working on this full time already. You know, it's a big lift. Next slide. So in addition, our Georgia Forestry Commission, they issue burn permits for 1.4 million acres per year. They would actually like to get that to 2 million acres. They think that that's the number they need to be at. So we're not only talking about doing exceptional events for 22 and 23, the 124 of them that I talked about. We're going to have to submit exceptional events for the current year, the 2024 data. You know, that's going to be maybe another 50 or 60 for 2024 data. But to maintain attainment with the standard, they're going to keep burning year after year. We're going to have to keep submitting exceptional events, you know, 50, 60, 70 of them every year forever. I mean, it just seems like, I mean, this is like multiple people, full-time job doing exceptional events, and there's no sight in the end because, you know, we need to keep doing the prescribed burning. Everybody agrees it's, you know, you need to do the prescribed burns to prevent the catastrophic wildfires, which if you get those large wildfires, you know, then you're burning, there's a lot more smoke involved and the health impacts are much larger from the wildfires than a bunch of small prescribed fires. Next slide. So these are EPA's elements. There's 5 elements. There's a conceptual description. There's the clear causal relationship, and I'll talk a lot about that. There is the human activity unlikely to reoccur, not reasonably controllable or preventable, and then public comment period. Next slide. So one of the ways to meet the fire return interval will meet one of the elements. So we were able to track down this published map. Next slide. And we can actually zoom in on Georgia. We have a GIS layer. So in each of our areas, we're actually going to zoom in even further into each of those 6 areas that I talked about. And we will be able to present the fire return interval to EPA, which actually meets one of the 5 elements. So we believe we have that. Next slide. Not reasonably controllable. EPA's guidance says that a smoke management program certified by EPA is appropriate for doing that, and Georgia has one that is certified. So we checked the box on that. You know, and part of that plan is our Georgia Forestry Commission. They issue burn permits for people to do their burns. You know, they look at dispersion characteristics, meteorology. They look at forecast. If it's a forecasted code orange day, they don't issue permits on those days. And they look at other things such as, you know, is the smoke going to be blown into highly populated areas or sensitive locations like hospitals and schools and things like that. And if it is, then they won't issue burn permits. So that's all part of our smoke management program that Georgia Forestry Commission is implementing. One note is that the military bases do not get burn permits from our Georgia Forestry Commission. And so that's one piece we're trying to figure out in our exceptional events, how to wrap that into our demonstration. Next slide. So Augusta monitor, next slide. Same slide that Deanna showed, the full distribution of the 3 years worth of data that go into the design value. This is after the biased adjustment. I'm going to focus on the higher values, which is the far left end of the distribution. Next slide. So this is the same plot, but we're only looking at the very far left of the plot. And what we've identified are the days that we're going to remove. It would make probably a lot of sense. I mean, it would help us a lot to remove some of those blue days on the top of the line. But like I said, that's 2021, and EPA is not going to use 2021 for anything. So we don't really want to put our effort into 2021. So for 2022 and 2023, we have identified, I believe it's 23 days. 21 days from 2023 and a couple of days from 2022. Next slide. So these are the dates with the values. So these are the days that we plan to develop exceptional event demonstrations for. Next slide. And this is similar to what Deanna showed earlier, except I added two more columns, the two columns on the right that show after basically the number of days that were removed. So 2 days in 2022 and 21 days in 2023. Those bring those annual values down, and then the 3-year average is 9.0, which would be attainment with the standard. Next slide. So like I said, we are working on a template. I don't have graphics for Augusta because the template we're working on is for Sandersville, but I'm going to show a couple of highlights of what we're doing in Sandersville, but we're going to do this for all 6 areas, including Augusta. Next slide. So you start out looking at your time series plots, just to see where the high values are coming from. In this case, you actually have high values on the 14th. I believe it's February 14th, you have high values. During the day, but what you also see is transport of the plume overnight. So on the 15th, you actually start out in the early morning hours with high values, and those are caused by fires from the day before on the 14th being transported to the monitor. And then you also have some fresh fires on the 15th later in the day that actually add to it as well. Next slide. So EPA actually requires a comparison to historical data. So this is what we're doing here. We're actually looking at the seasonal average concentration and then comparing it to the diurnal profile on those 2 high days, the 14th and the 15th. Next slide. And then we start looking at this is really getting into the clear causal relationship element that EPA is requiring. So what we have on this one is it's a map. We have the PM 2.5 concentration. Then we have the triangles are the permits that were issued by the Georgia Forestry Commission. The bigger the triangle, the more acreage of the burn permit. We also have the hazardous mapping system smoke plumes from NOAA. Those are the gray smoke plumes on there. And then we have the back trajectories. And in this case, this is the back trajectory for the hour with the highest value. And what you can see is that the back trajectory passes right over one of the fires. Next slide. And we actually look at the satellite imagery on the right side, and we can actually see the smoke plume from that fire hitting the Sandersville monitor. Next slide. So this is the highest value on the 15th actually happened in the early morning hours of the 15th, where we don't have satellite because it's nighttime, or you don't get the satellite nighttime, or if there's cloud coverage. But what we can see is the back trajectories are actually passing over a number of fires west and northwest of Sandersville. Next slide. So we do have some satellite imagery later in the day, on the day before, on the 14th, that actually shows the large smoke plume. Then based on our trajectories show that smoke plume is then transported to the Sandersville monitor over the nighttime hours. Next slide. So we're trying to streamline our exceptional event demonstrations. We would like to get it down from 50 to 100 pages per demonstration, maybe down closer to 10 to 20 pages or 10 to 15 pages. So that's one thing we're working on now. We're working with our neighboring states. I talked about the Georgia Forestry Commission. We have all that data in-house. We're going to be working with South Carolina Forestry to get the data from South Carolina, Alabama Forestry to get the data for Alabama, and then Tennessee for our Chattanooga area. And then figuring out what to do with the military bases because they do a lot of prescribed burning there. Next slide. So I have 2 more slides that kind of leads into Greg's talk, and I'll let him talk more about the modeling. But everything I talked about so far has to do with the designations of attainment and non-attainment. All of those exceptional event demonstrations need to be approved by EPA. Another thing is if we do get the background down, let's say for Augusta from 9.4 down to 9.0, that is our design value of 9.0. Usually when you do your modeling, you start with your background concentration, which in Georgia, we use the nearest monitor to set the background. And then you add the emissions from the project that's being permitted on top of that. So in this one, we kind of have the current value. We do the FEM adjustment, which gets the background down further. Let's say we can get it down to 9.0. It really leaves no headroom for new industry to come in and build and have emissions and things like that. So what we would like to do is actually remove additional days, additional exceptional events to get us below 9, to give us the headroom to allow new industry to come in. So if we can get the headroom, say down to 7, from 9 down to 7, it actually gives us headroom for new industry to come in and expand. Those that are beyond the designation process, the exceptional events, demonstrations, and the removal of the data for PSD background purposes is delegated to the permitting authority, which is the state of Georgia, the state of South Carolina. It does not require EPA's approval to do that. And so the hurdle of removing days is lower because we don't need to do the 5 elements that we need to do for designations. Next slide. So this is, again, our design values. Once we do our exceptional events, all the red areas, we hope to get down to 9.0, but we are going to continue to do more. Next slide. And so for PSD background, this is the number of demonstrations we plan to do. And we're looking at every site because, like I said, for PSD background, we use the nearest monitor to set our background. So we are actually looking at over 1,200 exceptional event demonstrations. We're trying to get these down to literally maybe 1 or 2 or 3 pages per demonstration, where they're going to be much shorter than the ones that I talked about earlier. But getting our PSD background values as low as possible to increase the headroom for new industry is very important. And this is how we're going to do it. I know South Carolina is going to talk about modeling and this, but this is kind of what Georgia is focusing on. Georgia is focusing on. Thank you. And I think that's it. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Jim.
Get my presentation. My name is Greg Keena. They're loading that. I am the section manager for the Bureau of Air Quality, South Carolina Air Quality Modeling Section. And we'll be presenting on how all the changes to the PM 2.5 standard is going to relate to modeling activities. I will put a plug in at first for air quality forecasting. Ozone, we forecast ozone this time of year from April through September. So if you're curious about those forecasts, I invite you to Google EnviroFlash and get those daily air quality forecasts, or you can customize it the way you'd like it and get alerts for ground level ozone, or if we happen to issue, we also monitor PM 2.5 levels in the state. If we were to issue an air quality alert related to PM 2.5, you would get those alerts related to PM 2.5. So Google EnviroFlash if you're interested in that. Having said that, I will move on to the modeling presentation. You can move on to the next slide, please. So facilities in South Carolina are required to demonstrate compliance, that their emissions coming from their industry is not causing or contributing to a violation or exceedance in the air quality, the standards. So in South Carolina, we have 2 standards. Standard 2 basically adopts the NAAQS, which is PM 2.5, PM10, SO2, NOx, CO, and lead. And we also have standard 8, which is for air toxics. When there are changes related to construction of new sources, we might require modeling compliance demonstration, or maybe not a modeling compliance demonstration, which I'll talk about more in a minute. But to basically show that facility-wide, the emissions are not cause or contribute to a violation or an exceedance of the standard. So when there are stack changes or change in location with the stack, or emission increases in particular, we might require additional analysis to demonstrate that an exceedance is not occurring. So next slide, please. So we have different methods for basically showing compliance. Maybe there's an exemption for it. We basically follow, for PM 2.5, we follow the exemptions that permitting follows. So there might be some categorical exemptions, such as fuel burning. I'm sorry, I'm talking about toxics now, but such as, well, if they emit less than 5 tons per year, maybe their, boiler that, less than 10 million BTU per hour and burns virgin fuel, there's categorical exemptions like that. But the facility-wide, I'm sorry, so I'm going to talk a little bit more in a couple minutes about other information. And then if we don't get, if we have to go into modeling, Screen 3 is a good screening tool that we still use. I know EPA doesn't like it, but eventually we may have to change that to AirScreen or something like that. But AirMod is definitely the way we recommend running these compliance demonstrations. And in this case for PM 2.5, the background concentration must be added in order to show the total impact with the background in addition to the facility sources. Next slide, please. Getting into how the new standard will impact modeling, of course, changing the standard from 12 to 9, and it's 9.0. We'll have to comply with that. So for PSDs, that it will be now on. Those are the major projects that are above PSD thresholds. For minor sources, we're still considering how to apply that and when we're going to require demonstrations comply with the 9. But hopefully that'll be determined pretty soon. Other projects and renewals additional projects for minor sources and renewals. I'd like to say go ahead and start looking into that with compliance with the 9 to make sure that we're not going to see any issues. And there may be times when like one of these exemptions that I mentioned on the previous slide may not entirely fit. Maybe a facility has 20 sources that emit a pound per hour. And we normally exempt sources up to a pound per hour, but at some point that those emissions become significant. So we may have to entertain requiring a compliance demonstration through modeling related to the new sources. And also at times, maybe if there's a regulatory enforcement action or something like that related to the facility and the pollutant, or their citizen complaints, we definitely we reserve the right to require modeling for those type of situations. Another thing that EPA has stated that they have not released yet is a new significant impact level for the change in the annual standard. It'll likely be reduced with the same ratio or the same percentage as the way that the NAAQS was reduced to 25% reduction. And we're hoping to hear about that by the end of the month. But they said definitely by May 6th. So we'll be on the lookout for that. That'll also affect some of our other information as well as PSD compliance demonstrations. And of course, this is, I'm sorry, we're not expecting any changes to the PM 2.5 increments. Challenge we know that this is going to be a challenge for everybody, not just the industry, but for the state to demonstrate compliance with the new standard. Next slide, please. So some of the things that we've done to preemptively help the regulated community, the modeling community, is to go ahead and look at this exceptional event-like cases, like Jim mentioned, and EPA calls it atypical activities. But we want to try to reduce those concentrations as much as possible to give us more headroom, like Jim mentioned, so that we can give industry some of that room to have new projects. So in October of 2023, this past October, EPA released some guidance related to developing background concentrations for use in modeling demonstrations. So we took that guidance and we took a good read of it and we said, we can do something about that now. So between October and December, we have meteorologists on our team. They looked at that data and did a great job with that. And so not only we were using 2017 to 2019 data previously, we updated the data to 2020 to 2022. Of course, that data is more contaminated with smoke events and dust and anything on fireworks and everything else you can think of. But it is, we were able to use that guidance to give us some reduction in those concentrations. On a day-to-day level, we look for wildfire smoke impacting the state, fireworks. 4th of July is a big day, so there might be 3 or 4 hours of spikes. We can say that, okay, this is contaminated with what we call celebrations, which part of that guidance document says remove data related to that. But EPA is granting us some flexibility with modeling analyses. So we're taking that to a T, and we're doing a lot of work to try to work those concentrations down related to exceptional events. We didn't want to go too far with this first cut. We can make some assumptions and say, well, that day, this day, we wanted to make the product defensible. So we tried not to bite off more than we could chew. But some of the products we looked at related to this, Jim brought up, but satellite imagery, aerosol optical depths, HMS or hazard smoking, smoke tools, where fires were located, drawing back trajectories, looking at other meteorological data, the whole host of data that went into looking at this stuff. But within the 2-month time frame, we were able to, get, something that we felt was defensible and work those concentrations down and go ahead and release that to the modeling community. So we call that atypical events in modeling, a little different from exceptional events, as we have a little bit more leverage to exclude those type of events, but from EPA, but hopefully we're, good to go with that. And we also applied bias corrections that Deanna and Jim talked a little bit about as well. We took the quarterly, I think we used their method 2, which is the quarterly biases, and reduced concentrations from that, because we saw about a 0.5 microgram per cubic meter decrease related to taking those biases. So, so we recommend using this data for current compliance demonstrations in South Carolina. Next slide, please. So this is a chart with the background concentrations at each of the monitors in South Carolina. I'll just focus on the Trenton monitor, which is the 3rd bar over, which is the one that's in Central Savannah area. So you can see the black bar there was what we were previously using with the 2017 to 2019 data. And for Trenton, that was 7.7 micrograms per cubic meter. So when we just looked at the design value without taking out any exceptional event-like cases and without applying the atypical activity, as we call it in the modeling world, and bias correction, it turned out to be about 7.5 micrograms per cubic meter. And then after taking those 2 into account, the medium blue bar, the lighter blue bar is the design value without taking those 2 things into consideration. The concentrations are reduced to the middle blue bar when you consider the atypical activities. And then if you also consider the bias reductions, didn't reduce things a whole lot at Trenton, but maybe another 1/10 there. You could see the darker blue bar on the bottom. But you really don't see it as much on the annual level, of course, because we're averaging things over the entire year. But next slide, please. If we look at the 24-hour PM 2.5 24-hour, you can see a lot more reduction. and the concentrations related to taking these things into account that EPA has put in their background concentration document for modeling compliance demonstrations. So you could see that 16 would have, we would have been using 16 last year for Trenton. If we were to use the same method we used in the past, the design value would have gone up for Trenton, something like 16.5. I don't remember the exact value, 16.45 looks like. And then if you exclude exceptional events, it gets dropped to about 14. And then just a slight reduction with the bias correction at Trenton, because it wasn't as impactful at Trenton as it might have been at other places such as Greenville. See some good reduction there, as well as some other places you might notice on the chart here. Next slide, please. Okay, so I want to talk just a bit about other information. This particular guidance has not been utilized by the modeling community very much over the last almost 10 years. It's been out now since late 2014. So I want to kind of highlight this as a way to, especially with minor source projects, as some possible ways to take more of a qualitative approach to demonstrating compliance rather than using quantitative, which, you know, we like the quantitative more just because it does put everybody on equal terms, but there may not be a reason for the hardship of modeling if, you know, we can meet some of these, you know, if proper justification is submitted to us to have these reductions. I'm sorry, with new projects. So this was, yeah, I think it was developed in late 2014, but may not have been put out there until 2015. So again, this stuff that I present here may not be applicable to a facility that has violations or citizen concerns, but yeah, we may still require modeling anyway. So some of those options are, we have two different types of options. One is single factor option, which does not require background data as part of the justification. But if a facility does their own ambient monitoring, it may be very expensive, but that is a way to get around having to, or being required to provide a compliance demonstration to meet the standards. Wind tunnel studies, that also might be expensive, but you might be able to find a similar facility in the United States and present that information to us through wind tunnel studies. The two that are most often used are emissions netting here and the project only significant impact modeling. If the project is showing a significant contribution at the fence line or beyond, then we can exclude that. We don't need to go through a full facility-wide analysis for a project that is showing insignificant activity with the project at the fence line beyond with the air quality concentrations. The project only, I'm sorry, just next slide, please. All right, so the second part of this is the weight of evidence approaches. These approaches have to include mention of the background as part of the justification. The background meaning the monitor data, design values, and comparing that to the standards, as well as, you know, maybe using some of these things to help with compliance. Some of the things we use more often, again, the facility-wide or project emissions that are less than PSD emission thresholds. That might be part of, so the compliance here to justify the use of that, actual emissions versus maximum permitted emissions tends to be a well-used one, as well as the emissions inventory. But we have emission inventories on our website at the county level. A lot of times facilities might say, well, we're only emitting 7 tons per year from this source, this new source, but the county inventory shows over 1,000 tons per year. That's less than 1% contribution to the environment. Perhaps we don't need to model this. But again, this is more related to minor sources, but could also be applied to PSD, but only addressing the state regulations as part of the PSD, not the PSD itself. That's going to be a whole nother ballgame with going through significant impact modeling and then doing cumulative impact modeling beyond that. So in the past, we've recommended using the highest monitor as part of the compliance demonstration for PSD, either in the state or nearby. In some cases, it might be more permissible or allowable to use the, maybe we could use Chesterfield, which is the lowest monitor, or Trenton, since we're in CSRA rather than using Augusta, and in terms of demonstrating compliance. But we're going to try to have a little bit more flexibility with that. I know in the past we said just plug in all your sources and throw in the highest background concentration and you should be good to go. And you won't have to really justify a whole lot there, but there may be more justification that's necessary in order to demonstrate compliance. Next slide, please. So tips on getting a timely permit. I just wanted to throw the screen up there just as we get a lot of applications where we have to contact the consultant or the facility to get more information because, proper, we just don't have the proper paperwork in our hand to be able to make a determination of compliance. So just make sure that the applications are consistent, that they're unambiguous, that they make sense to us. If you have the same information in different parts of the application, make sure that they match up with one another. Because that's a lot of times our headache is trying to figure out, I don't know if it's a 12-foot stack height or a 25-foot stack height, because they have both numbers in their application. So just making sure all that stuff is consistent and it makes sense to you just read through the application and use the forms that we have out there. All that stuff should be, we are using e-permitting now. So make sure you use that stuff that's in e-permitting. And also giving timely responses to our comments and questions. Next slide. So this is my last slide, but wanted to show some resources you can go to get information. 3 of these are based on our website. One of them is the last one there is the EPA guidelines for making changes in the modeling world to those background concentrations. So I recommend using these resources and or reaching out to me. And next slide. So my contact information is there. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. All right.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, for that presentation. We'll also thank our other presenters, Jim and Deanna and Mary Peyton Wall, as well as Greg. So for those who are listening online, I'll just mention this again. We will be having a question and answer session here shortly. What we'd like to ask for you all to do, if you do have questions that you would like to ask, you can either put them in the chat or raise your hand and we will have someone help you to ask those questions. But I'd like to start with those who are here in the room to see if there's any questions that we have that we want to address. I guess I can also mention that these presentations here today will be available to those who have registered. The presentations will be sent to you. Those do have contact information, so if there's questions that are not answered here today, I'm sure you could follow up directly with the presenters as well. So that's another opportunity. So we will start with questions if there's any that you have here in the room, and if not, then we'll see if there's any one who would like to pose a question to the presenters. And if you would like, you can come down if you want to share it, a question in front of the group or.
Hi, my name is Carla Delaney. I'm with the City of Augusta, Georgia, and the Arts NPO. And my question is, it pertains more to, I'm hearing about all the regulations and the changes that are being pushed out. And as municipalities, we're recruiting, we're trying to do economic development, we have industrial parks and things of that nature. So while we're feeling the requirements, what has the EPA done for the industries to go in tandem with some of these changing criteria and impact us? Because we can't do it alone. So has any new implications, anything for the industry that are causing some of the challenges that we're facing?
Some of these questions may be a little difficult to answer today, as we don't have everyone in the room that may be able to answer some of the questions. So we'll definitely try to make sure if we don't have answers today, we'll make a list of all questions and present them as well when we share the presentation. But if there's anyone who wants to address that.
Well, I can try to at least address it from the state standpoint, because EPA is in the room here, but really this is the state's kind of implementing the EPA standard. And the two things we're doing, I actually used to be the liaison to the Georgia Department of Economic Development for 3 years. And I understand the issues with businesses trying to come into non-attainment areas. It doesn't happen. And so our first priority is to get this area designated as attainment as opposed to non-attainment. And we're going to do that through the exceptional events. That's the only tool that EPA has given us to do that. So we're putting all of our resources into the exceptional events to get us into attainment. That's the first thing. The second thing is what Greg talked about and I talked about briefly is the PSD background value. So getting the background and creating that headroom. So if you're at 9.0 and that's your background, there's no room for industry to come in. So we're going above and beyond and looking beyond the exceptional events for designations and looking at these atypical events and pulling out more and more. You saw we're looking at over 1,000 of them in Georgia. We're gonna look at them, and if it's influenced by fire in any way, we're taking it out of the annual average to build that headroom so that industry can come in and take their background and add and continue to expand and build new business. So those are really the two things. Getting this area designated as attainment is the first thing, and the second thing is getting that background concentration low enough that there's enough headroom for industry to come in. And it's really the state to take the lead on those. Not EPA. So that's why South Carolina and Georgia, it's a top priority for both of our states to do both of those things. Did you have a follow-up on that?
Yes. Sorry. So I've been taking part in some of the stakeholder meetings and the advanced air quality meetings and things of that nature to try to get more education. But what tools are you offering? Say, for instance, we're in the planning and development department. We have an industrial park that's expanding. What tools are you giving, or can you provide us as we evaluate potential projects to make sure that we're not, signing off or condoning or don't have a plan to address some of the expansion that's already headed our way? And it also would help our EPA to know some of the criteria and things of that nature, because I think there's still a gap in the education and as far as what the contributors are, what we can do from a plan review standpoint, from a architectural review standpoint, and just in general, because the developments are coming and we're working hard to attract them, but we want to make sure we're not pushing ourselves in a direction that we can't sustain.
Yeah, so I mean, the new rule is effective May 6th. So as of May 6th, in fact, we had some big projects in Georgia. We have one of them, some gas-fired turbines being built by Georgia Power. We're getting that permit out. The plan is to get it out on May 5th. So it's, I mean, it's definitely something that needs to be considered. If, the biggest impact is on PSD projects, which are the larger projects. If you have any of those coming your way, you know, they need to be reaching out to the state environmental groups now, especially if they think they're gonna have a problem with the PM2 meeting, PM 2.5. They need to be reaching out to, if it's in the Augusta side, reaching out to us. If it's across the border, reaching out to South Carolina to start talking about that now. I mean, it's a big deal. It potentially could stop some projects from coming if it's not dealt with properly. So early communication is all I can say from, you know, at least from the state perspective, at least reaching out to our permitting program, myself, reach out to myself or our permitting program. I probably said the same for South Carolina, is early communication on those projects.
I would say the same for South Carolina. If you know you're looking at a big project, we need you to come into the office and discuss it with us as early as possible. We are working with our Commerce Department to make sure they understand the significance of the new rule and the importance of coordinating with us as early as possible. I mean, Greg talked about the work we did with the modeling and background concentrations. We've done that already. So facilities can start using that new background concentrations on May 6th. So we've already done that work. So it's very important to have that.
Okay, we'll take another question, and we do understand we have some questions in the chat, and we'll get to those questions here shortly.
I have to face the music here. I'm Will Williams with the Western South Carolina Economic Development Partnership, and we do economic development for Aiken, Edgefield, and Saluda counties. Obviously, Saluda is not in the MSA, but let's be realistic, and none of the exceptions are granted. Is it a blanket designation? Is it going to be the rural areas, the urban areas? We're developing a new industrial park up close to the Lexington County line. We've seen what the Trenton station says. So are we going to be punished for forever and ever, amen? Or how is this all going to be handled? I know there's still a ways to go, but there seems to be so much ambiguity. But yet on May 6th, we're dead.
So the way the designation process works is you, if an area has a monitor over the standard, that kind of starts where you start looking at which counties will be included in the non-attainment area and how far do you go? Because it's not only the area that has the violating monitor, it's any area that's contributing to that violation. And so you need to look at emissions in the neighboring counties and things like that. So the general idea is you start with the MSA or the CBSA, the Metropolitan Statistical Area, which I believe is 5 or 6 counties. Here is your starting point, and from there, then you whittle it the way down. You know, with a monitor so low on the South Carolina side, if this area was designated non-attainment, it could just be a single county. It could just be Richmond County. It could be 2 counties, but that would be part of the demonstration that the state actually needs to do. They Mary Payton showed the 5 factors. The 2 most important factors are air quality and emissions. And so, looking at the emissions, if the emissions are lower and can be demonstrated that they're not causing, the non-attainment, then those counties can be excluded from the non-attainment area and avoid a lot of this. So, again, states make recommendations, and that's 1 year from now. EPA then makes the final determinations, and they may or may not agree with what the states submit. But of course, the states usually try to whittle it down to as small of a non-attainment area as they can justify. Again, with our exceptional events, our plan is to recommend that the area is attainment, all of it, the whole Augusta Aiken area as attainment. with our exceptional events. Of course, the question is if EPA does not approve those exceptional events and designates as non-attainment, how big the area would be. And if EPA would give us the 120-day letter before that, which would allow us to provide additional information on the size of the non-attainment area, which we would try to reduce that as small as possible. And that's about all I can say at this point.
So what I'm hearing you say is May 6th, we all go into penalty box and then we wait until we can move forward.
So May 6th is when the standard is effective, which means any new projects that come in need to demonstrate that they can attain the new standard. We don't have non-attainment areas. There's no non-attainment areas until 2 years from now. So the non-attainment areas, that includes the things like the layer and the back and the racked and offsets and conformity, all that stuff we talked about, that only applies if the area is designated non-attainment. But until then, it really, any new project does need to show compliance with the standard of 9. And basically, they need to have the background value low enough that the project plus the that's so, nobody's really dead in the water. Like I said, us in South Carolina are looking at ways to get that background as low as possible to allow as many projects to move forward as possible.
So if somebody's talking to Rhonda and those in Columbia, they're just gonna have to have additional air emissions cleaning, have that additional cost to go through the permitting process. Is that right, Rhonda? Would that be safe to assume? I know you should never assume, but
Well, and I'll say that the background values in South Carolina are pretty low. I mean, they're in the low 7s. There shouldn't be a lot of problem with passing modeling, is my guess. On the Georgia side, it becomes a little more problematic.
And sometimes there's other ways to show compliance. It doesn't always mean you gotta add on a control device. Sometimes you can just modify your stacks and show compliance. So there's lots of ways of doing that demonstration besides spending extra money on a new control device.
and y'all are great partners in what we do, and we appreciate that.
Any other questions in the room before we go to the ones online?
Adam Waller, SRS. Jimmy mentioned that only one exceptional event had been approved by EPA. Any idea how many have been not approved by EPA?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, we were.
The question was,
exceptional events. You mentioned one had been approved by EPA. Any idea how many have not been approved?
so that's one exceptional event for prescribed fire has been approved by EPA. As far as I know, I don't know if any others have been submitted because in the past, there hasn't been a need to submit them because everybody is well below the standard, at least in the eastern US. There were a lot of wildfires. We're going to be submitting exceptional events for wildfires as well. The Canadian wildfires impacted our monitors, and we're going to be submitting exceptional events for the Canadian wildfires as well. There's a lot more experience with with wildfire exceptional events. There's actually been many more of those submitted to EPA. Not all of them are always approved. So it's hard to say, but we're going to really focus on the prescribed fire exceptional events. And as far as I know, only one's been submitted, and it was really developed to show that it can be done. And it was done in collaboration with the federal land managers, California and EPA all kind of worked together on to show that it could be done. So it's really new. I mean, this is really new territory for us and for EPA. So.
Any more questions in-house? If not, we'll turn to our online questions. Okay, the first question we have here is from Malik Hamid. Will SIPs be developed prior to EPA's final? I'm sorry, I can't see. EPA's final destination of non-attainment. If yes, what local government, I'm sorry, I can see it better here. If yes, what local government role will be in its implementation, or what local government will be required to do with respect to enforcement of SIPs, such as for Augusta, Georgia?
And just to tackle on the prior question, it could be a portion of the county. So when we did the ozone non-attainment area, it was a portion of York County. It was not all of York County. So it can be just portions. If South Carolina gets pulled in, if it is determined that the Augusta area is a non-attainment, it might just be like the North Augusta area or North Augusta Beach Island area. That's really the only developed industry-wise in Aiken County. There's really just not a whole lot of major facilities on our side of the border. So, and then let's see, in terms of the geographic designations, that's kind of helping there a little bit. How can local entities assist with responsible agencies on information? And unfortunately, there's probably not going to be a whole lot there. The actual geographic designation would actually be assigned by EPA, and then the states would work to try and, I don't want to use the word negotiate, but work on what that area will finally end up looking like. I think that answers those. Was criteria determining designating surrounding localities to non-attainment if there's no air monitoring stations in those localities. It is based on the MSA. So it is based on the actual monitors in the MSA, not necessarily because, you know, on the South Carolina side, the monitors in Trenton, but Trenton and Aiken are in the MSA. So that monitor applies into Aiken County as well. So it's an air shed. It's not a one pinpoint of a place.
I'll add it.
Yeah.
And I'll add to that. So the first criteria is air monitoring. The second criteria is emissions and emissions related data, such as VMT, vehicle miles traveled. So for areas that don't have monitors, we do have emissions from the emission inventory for all counties. And so basically areas that don't have monitors is the emissions, and then a determination is made if those emissions are contributing to the violating monitor. And there's no bright line where if it's over a certain percent or not, it's really more of a weight of evidence type of demonstration that is done for the designation. So it's, we will be looking at emissions and emissions related parameters for areas that don't have monitors. Even areas that have monitors that are attaining could be brought in if they have emissions that it's determined are leading to non-attainment at another location.
Okay, we'll go back to another question online. Excuse me, I'm getting used to some new trifocals here, so. And so, well, this next question here, in South Carolina, will there be opportunities to lower the background concentration further?
Guidance was issued in October, and we tried to get the data out there for use for modeling purposes by the end of the year, because we weren't sure when the new PM 2.5 max was going to come out, and it came out in February. But so we went ahead and did the shotgun approach with the tools that we had available. We're currently working with our GIS department, as well as I think Daryl Jones has been helping us out some with providing the locations of fires. This kind of work has not been done by us before. And so we thought, well, we need to jump into it right away to help industry out. So we did that. However, there may be some areas where we might be able to exclude more events. I can tell you, I think at Trenton, we had maybe 10 exclusions per year, something like that. But there could be more related to prescribed burns. But we did not have the information in order to defensively remove that data at this time. However, in the future, as we go through this work again, we might be able to get more reduction as we refine the approach. I hope that answers that.
The next question we have, fires or burns are key contributing factors. Although burn permits may be required, how non-attainment locally can be made sure that permitted requirements is enforced since permitting agencies is GFC. That's the question. How non-attainment can be ensured or permits required or enforced.
It sounded like GFC, that's Georgia Forestry Commission.
Oh.
So Jim Boylan here. So Georgia Forestry Commission does issue our burn permits. I'm not exactly sure. I don't know if the question is, how do they ensure that people get burn permits when they're burning? Or how they ensure that the acreage that they applied for is the acreage that is burned. I'm not actually sure. I don't know if Daryl wants to talk about how South Carolina does that. If there's a way to ensure that, I don't know if that's even what the question is, but I don't know if that's what the question is. Making sure people are getting permits when they're burning. Is that what the question is?
It sounds like they want to know how can those permits requirements be enforced.
So so when you get a burn permit, it's really for, at least in Georgia, it's for the acreage and it's for the day. You get a burn permit. If you want to burn tomorrow, you can get a burn permit today, or you can get one tomorrow morning. And you basically submit an application and you get the burn permit within about 2 or 3 minutes. And it's for a certain amount of acreage and it's for a certain day. And then the requirement is, as long as you don't burn more than those acreage, you're in compliance with your permit. You know, there might be occasion when people might burn more. And I'm not sure how GFC enforces that or does compliance for that, but it's very different than an industrial permit that is very detailed and takes months and months and months to get. Burn permits are, at least in Georgia, are given in matter of minutes, as opposed to a matter of months. And it's very simple. It just has the purpose of the burn, the location, and the amount of acreage. And if the meteorological conditions are correct and the forecasted air quality is appropriate, they'll issue the permit. And if the burn conditions are not appropriate, they won't issue the burn permit. I don't know what else to say on that.
I see that there's a hand raised on the virtual meeting, so we'll take some of those questions. So Amy, if you'll assist with indicating who has their hand raised.
Okay, I don't know how to do this. Let's see, I don't know where the,
Okay.
when I got a hand raised, I don't see the question.
Let's have Catherine.
Yeah,
Catherine, I'm
Oscar,
sorry, I need help with this.
Oscar, if you want to just unmute and ask your question.
Okay, yep. Kind of on the previous question, I got a couple items, but a few of them are kind of related to the burning. Related to the last question, not all burns have permits, right? There are people that burn stuff all the time, and so that could lead to a non-attainment event. I don't know how we handle that, right? Because you know, if I back up just a second, you know, all of this stuff has a huge financial impact, not only on a municipality, but industries. And a municipality that would like to create an environment where, safe environment, but create an environment that's economically advantageous. There's a lot of challenge with all of this, but from what I can see, there's also a lot of fuzziness about this number, this 9.0. We did see some really good data on a 20% increased bias, which I thought was interesting. The Trenton value, which is kind of, and again, this is just my assumption, kind of out in, it's not Augusta, but it had an 8.9 value, and it's kind of a representative of a place that's not not urbanized. The exceptional events, it's convenient for EPA to allow to remove those, but they have sustaining impacts. The PM 2.5 that's released, that settles as dry fall on every surface anywhere, and you get a windstorm, and I'm sure there's resuspension of that material. So, how long afterward are we looking at the impact of a very large controlled burn like Fort Eisenhower, and that sustained impact over time, to really kind of resuspend some of that material. So just a few concerns, but I guess a couple questions. Number one, is it possible for the regulatory agencies, so USGS allows for sponsored, for like a municipality or industry to sponsor a new station. Would it be possible for Augusta to maybe sponsor a few more stations, still run, operated completely by the regulatory agencies, but sponsored, so we can, have some defensible data. And then I guess the other thing for kind of fugitive things that don't have burn permits but are going to be impactful, are there other things on these air stations that allow you to determine whether it's smoke? What other parameters are we looking at that we can say, okay, well, that may have been an unlicensed burn or something like that. So just trying to kind of think around all of these things that may be outside of a actual permit to burn. Thank you.
Okay, we'll give a couple of the questions a shot here.
So the first comment was adding more monitors to Augusta. So keep in mind, it's the highest monitor in the area that determines attainment or basically non-attainment. So the more monitors you add, the more chances you have of having non-attainment. And you also have more exceptional events that then need to be done to get those values down to 9. So, adding more monitors, I don't think will help, because it really is the highest monitor in the area that determines non-attainment. So that's one piece. The second piece of what's causing the high value. So we do have some monitors that are speciation monitors that can measure organic carbon, elemental carbon, sulfate, nitrate, ammonium, and soils. So we do have a speciation monitor in Augusta, and so we can actually look at what components are leading to the high values. The high components are almost always organic carbon, which organic carbon can consist of smoke from wildfires and prescribed fires. Organic carbon can come from combustion processes, and organic carbon can come from natural processes such as VOCs coming off of vegetation and then being converted to organic aerosol through photochemistry. And so right now, by looking at the speciation data, we can't break that part apart, but we have sent some of our filters to University of Mississippi, yes, to actually try to look at some tracers that can help answer that question. And so we're looking into it. but it's, there's not a lot of data out there on the speciation, and then within the speciation, the source apportionment of the sources that contributed to that species. Do you want to add it?
Even having extra, this is Deanna, those are, even having extra monitoring sites, like Jim said, the defining monitor is the highest monitor. But for every monitoring site we have, you still have to go through the process of all the quality assurance, quality control, and then the data processing. And for the ones in Georgia, because I think you're from Augusta, the ones in Georgia, we have a pretty robust network, and our staff, we just don't have the staff to do it. We can't, honestly, a lot of times we can't find the staff to do it. So throwing more money at it doesn't always work. But thank you for the thought.
All right, I see we still have some hand raised online. Catherine, do you know who may be next? I see Oscar has a hand raised. I don't know if that's
I
who just,
think that was just, we didn't lower it.
okay. All right, well, we'll go back to some of the questions we have here. Joel Duke, who's involved in the geographic designation of a non-attainment, EPA, South Carolina, or Georgia? How can... There's a second part to that question, and Jim has indicated all three, but I'll also let Mary Payton elaborate a little more. The second part of the question, how can local entities assist and responsible agencies with information and data?
Yeah, I answered several of those all at once. So
Okay.
I got that. I covered that. Now, I think I covered that just a few minutes ago, that the geographic area will work with EPA. They, if we find that we're in a non-attainment area, and if we have to do designation, we will identify the areas, work with EPA. They can agree or disagree with those. So unfortunately, there's not going to be a whole lot that the local entities will be able to help us with on that part of it. But we thank you.
Are there any questions that we've missed? Oh, there are some more. Okay.
Monica, did we answer the question, what is determining criteria to designating surrounding localities to non-attainment if there's no monitoring station in those locations?
Yes.
Yeah, we answered that.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I'll let you read off some of those because I may be missing them. Amy, if
Okay.
there's some that I have missed, please go ahead and.
Yeah, I can't, okay, Joel already asked his question. Tanya has a question. I'm curious about the health impacts of changing the data. If the recognized levels are above safe health standards, reducing the numbers doesn't make the particulate go away. What resources are being talked about being provided to those living in unhealthy areas?
Any takers for that question? I'm curious about the health impacts of changing the data. And I'm assuming they're speaking of the exceptional events. Is that the data they're referencing?
So the comment is correct that by removing the data from our annual average for comparison to the next does not change anything that's floating around in the air, and it doesn't change anything that people are breathing. However, it's really more about the whole reason this was put in there, the exceptional event rule, was to not penalize areas and put areas into non-attainment for things that are beyond their control, such as natural events and and EPA guidance has thrown wildfires, which are natural events, and prescribed fires, which are done in order to prevent large wildfires. And in the end, it is recognized that prescribed fires does produce smoke, which can have some health impacts. But overall, the thought is that the impacts from wildfires that would occur if we were not doing the prescribed burns would be much worse on the health in the long run. So that's really the reason why EPA put this in there as an exceptional event, recognizing the importance of the prescribed fires to prevent the catastrophic wildfires. And you're right, in the end, there are still health impacts. And, I think people need to be educated that when they smell smoke, they need to take precautions such as putting on a mask, going indoors, having indoor filters that can filter things like that. And at that point, I think there could be some education on what people need to do when they smell smoke or if they're in a smoky area.
I'll also add that that's the reason that we do issue air quality alerts. When we see high numbers in our monitors, or we expect the numbers to be high the following day. So it's very important for anyone that's concerned about their health to make sure they get those alerts and sign up to get those alerts so they know when it's safe to be outside or when we recommend you not come outside, especially if you have any type of respiratory condition. So I know on DHEC's website, we have a lot of information about air quality forecasting. So we suggest you go there. Assuming Georgia has a lot of information as well. And we need people to get signed up to get those alerts.
Next question, Amy?
That is the last question I see right now. Unless somebody has a question, they want to raise their hand and ask it and unmute themselves, but that's all I see in the chat.
Okay, if that concludes all of the questions we have in the chat, as well as questions that we have here in person, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Rhonda and we'll conclude.
It's right at
12:15.
Oh, it's 12:15. We're over. Okay. So next steps, I think we presented a lot of information. We are going to send the slides out to everybody. If you still have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to the presenters. So as far as next steps, as you can see, we have a lot of work to do over the next 9 to 12 months. So we're going to be extremely busy. So we're going to be making some recommendations, as you heard, in February. So I guess closer to that time, we may want to bring the group back together just to share what our recommendations will be to EPA. We may not bring everybody back in the room to do that. That may be something we just do over a virtual call. So we can share what we plan to recommend to EPA early next year. That would be my recommendation for getting the group back together. This meeting was recorded. If you'd like to get the link to get the recording, contact us. We will send the slides out to everyone that registered. We'll try to get that out tomorrow. And I don't have anything else to add. We thank you for participating. I don't see any more questions. I think everybody's ready to eat lunch. And we thank you for your time and appreciate you being a part of the meeting. So thank you very much, and we are adjourned.